Sarah, Thomas, James and Diandra stood inside the eye of her little tornado, watching as the enemy approached from all sides. Footsteps sure and steady despite the high winds Sarah had unleashed on the more morbid little town around them. The things that moved toward them were absolutely hideous, animated versions of people long dead. It was as if someone had emptied the graveyards of all their corpses and used the bodies to move about in. Bloated, gas-filled bodies with paper-thin skin and heads of hair that appeared to be coming off in clumps as they moved. The soulless puppets ground rotting teeth and stood their ground, waiting for an opportunity to move in and get hold of the blonde-haired girl just yards away from them. These grotesque forms were dressed in shiny silk dresses and black and white tuxedos. The formal attire stuck to their moist, decaying forms and lent a feeling of horror movie zombie feature to the whole situation as they searched for a way to get closer to the four people inside the calm center of the whirlwind. The evil around them appeared to be growing in strength, and James managed to hold them at bay with great effort now. He had to ask for assistance from Sarah, Thomas and, surprisingly enough, Diandra. His girlfriend's presence in his head was so strong it was almost as strong as his circle mates, and it shocked him that it could be so, especially after knowing her such a short time. He hadn't expected that Diandra would have such an influence on his mind. She wasn't a keeper after all, just a dead girl. A wonderful and special dead girl, but other than having the ability to see certain things, she had never possessed the power to affect things the way he and his circle had, the way they still could. Why was this then that he felt as if his powers were working so much better at the moment because of her? He drew strength from Sarah and Thomas because of their soul connection. But this girl completed something else in him, and he was glad for himself that she hadn't stayed behind in the safe place. Looking at the restless, slimy things that stalked them, though, he wasn't so glad that she had to be here and in danger. Just like the rest of them, the girl in question looked at him and his fellow keepers and was very much afraid for them. She felt like the weak link, a huge liability that might cost them both time and victory in this messy situation. Present for some reason she wasn't quite aware of, but knowing she couldn't leave and also knowing that something was about to happen, Diandra tried to force herself to see into the future. Visions of puffy white hands descending onto her boyfriend's arms in an effort to pull them out of his sockets flashed through her head, and she moved as close to him as possible. So close now, they were practically standing in the same spot, and she could feel the vibration of his voice as he spoke. So caught up in the bad feelings she was having, it took her a moment to make out what James was saying. He was trying to calm her down and make her back off a bit. Sorrier than she could say for making such an idiot of herself, she just shook her head, held on tightly to James and turned her attention to the girl in front of her. Sarah said words under her breath, her attention clearly on something besides her companions at the moment. "Come to me," she muttered, pulling at the thin line that bound her to the thing she was seeking. An image of a faint blurry object burned in her head so strongly now that it actually caused pain, but she couldn't stop what she started. Not even when James tried to help her squash the impulse that drew her to the thing. Small, shiny and square-shaped, the object wavered in and out of focus, teasing her with the uncertainty of what it really was. She had to find out, had to know what Brachus was so desperate to keep from her. What was this thing that could bring down a being as evil as he was, and what other force was urging her to find it so strongly? It wasn't I am, and that was the only thing she knew for certain. A force, so determined, so strong, urged her to merge with the object and command it to come to her. She pushed harder, drawing it in with everything she had, and it seemed to be working. She felt a shifting inside, as if her blood was moving like a tide, with the object firmly attached to the end of an imaginary line, and all she had to do was reel it in. She should be happy about this, but it was beginning to make her feel more and more unpleasant, as if she were voluntarily exposing herself to some kind of deadly disease. Could dead people get sick? She felt an uncomfortable longing, a tug on her heart, like she was missing an important bit of information she really needed to have at this moment, preferably before this thing she called so urgently got here. Her only regret about this situation was that a small band of followers was forced to stumble into the unknown with her. Was she bringing disaster to their doorstep? And they weren't the only ones forced to follow Sarah's progress. Wherever she went, so did their gross audience. Bare feet slapped against the wet cobblestone, rotting flesh bubbled and squished as they made contact with the surface, tracking every movement she made.